Welcome to Lecture 2, Part 2. We are going to learn how to get input from a user. So we're going to start by reconsidering a simple program. And this looks, at first glance, almost identical to the program we just went through in Part 1. We are going to write a program that calculates the area of a circle, then prints out a specific message. Now there's one important change here. We're going to calculate the area of a circle with any radius entered by a user. So whereas before we had a set number, I think that number was 20. This time we don't have a set number. We are going to get a radius from a user. And remember, a user is anybody who is running our program. All right? Often when you're developing, you are both the programmer and the user. So we're going to go ahead and open up our editor. I'm going to use idle. And I'm going to go ahead and open a new file. Put that over there. And let's go back to our instructions real quick here. So, I am going to need a radius. Now, most of this program is actually going to look very similar to the previous program we wrote, with the notable exception of how we get the radius. So, let's go ahead and start. We're going to create a variable, and I'm going to call it radius. Whoops. So I'm going to put a comment here that says prompt the user to enter a radius. Remember before we just had radius equals 20. Well, that's not going to work this time because we don't know what the radius is going to be. We're going to get it from the user. So I'm going to start with radius equals. Remember, this is part of our assignment statement. We have our variable named radius on the left, our assignment operator, the equal sign, and we need to get input. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a command in Python, a built-in command called input. So we have the print command that we can print stuff out, right? I'll use print stuff. We also have the input command, and I'm going to come over to the interpreter here for a moment just to show you. If I just run this with nothing, what's going to happen when I hit enter is you'll see I've got a blinking cursor here, and I don't have my little lines, my little arrows indicating that I'm still writing into the interpreter. I've actually got a blinking cursor here, and what this means is it's waiting for some kind of input. So, I don't know, I'm just going to write the word input. And then Python tells me, okay, you entered input. And it puts quotations around it, single quotes, because this is not a number. We're going to talk about types in another video, but for now, we'll just leave this like this. I could also do input again, and I could enter a number, 700. And it's going to tell me you entered 700. Cool. Let's say that I want to sort of, and we will come back to our program here. Let's say that I want to give a little bit more information because just having a blinking cursor is not terribly helpful. So let's say that I want to put a little prompt. I'm going to put some quotations because my prompt is going to be text. And I'm going to say, enter a word. Okay? And I'm going to go ahead and put a colon and a space just to make it look nice. Close my parentheses. Now, when I hit enter, my input command will tell me, hey, enter a word. And now it's waiting for me to enter something. So sure, I'm going to say stuff. And it tells me once again, you entered stuff. I could do enter another word. And I could say another word. And it tells me what I entered. I could also just say enter a word, and then I could enter a number. Nothing is checking, right? So it tells me I entered 50. And we'll come back to, again, why there are quotes around this. But you get the idea. The input statement basically is going to take whatever you put in parentheses here in quotations as a prompt. If you put nothing, it's not going to give a prompt. And then it is going to prompt or not prompt the user with those words or with that text. And then the user can enter a text or a number or whatever. So Coming back over here, I have my input command, and I want to put a prompt because it's a lot better when we put a prompt, I think. And I'm going to say, enter a number for the radius. And what we've done here is we've basically created a way for us to get a radius without doing what we refer to as hard coding it into our program. So instead of specifying what the radius is, we've made this so we can basically use any radius. This is called generalizing the program. So when we do something like this, and generalizing is a programming concept that applies to any programming language and any program you may write, is we've written this now so that instead of just being able to be used for a circle of radius 20, it can be used for any circle. So we have taken a specific concept, a circle with the radius 20, and we have generalized it to any circle with any radius. Now there's one more thing we need to do, and we're going to talk more about why we're doing this and how this works in another video, but we need to also specify that this is going to be a number, because we don't want to end up with a radius of, I don't know, blanket. That's not a radius, right? So I am going to put a number type here. Python has a couple of different number types. We'll talk about what they are, again, not right now. But one of them is what we call a float. And a float is just a decimal number. Don't worry too much about it for now. So I have float, so I can make sure that I have a number. I've got parentheses, then my input, and then my prompt. And make sure that you have the correct number of parentheses at the end here. You should have a closing parentheses for every opening. So if you accidentally end up with one too few parentheses, you will run into an error, so just be wary of that. So I have radius equals float. Again, this is a specific type of number. And then I'm going to get some input, and here's the prompt. You can actually look at statements like this much the same way you would look at precedence in mathematics. So we would actually sort of look at this inside out. We have a prompt here. The prompt is enter a number for the radius. We're going to get some input from the user. And then we're going to make sure that that input is a floating point number, or a float. And if it's not, we will convert it, if possible. And again, we will come back to what that means in a moment. For now, let's just take the statement as this is how we're going to get input. Now the rest of this program is actually going to be pretty much the same. So I'm going to create my area variable, and I'm just going to say radius times 3.14159. Again, that's what the instructions tell us to do. And I'm going to finally come down here, and I'm going to display the results. And I'm going to do this the same way that I did it in the previous program. Oops. Now, one thing to note. In the previous program, when we used radius here, it referred to 20, because remember we had radius equals 20. We actually don't know what the radius is here. And that's why it becomes doubly important to make sure we don't have any numbers written specifically in here. All right? So we have our prompt to get a radius from the user. We're going to save that information to our radius variable. We're going to calculate the area. Again, same way we did last time. This is our whole assignment statement. So we have our area variable equals, and then our expression, which is radius times 3.14159, which is what we're using for pi. And then we print it out. And again, this is just Python syntax. So this is looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and save it. And we're going to save it. I'm going to put it under programs, and we're going to save this as radius with input. You could save it as whatever you like. By the way, you shouldn't need to specify .pi here. Windows and Mac should both automatically, if you're an idle, recognize that you are working with a pi file. If you are working in Trinkets, you don't need to worry about it anyway because you can run it directly in Trinkets without downloading or saving anything. If you do want to download and save it from Trinkets, there is another video you are welcome to watch on how to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save, and then I want to run it. So I'm going to make sure I'm clicked into my .py file. I'm going to click run, and click run module. And you will see, again, you can ignore this stuff. I get a nice little prompt here. Enter a number for the radius. Well, let's go ahead and use 20 because I happen to remember that the circle of radius 20 has an area of approximately 1256 or 36? 56. And when I do that, it'll automatically calculate it and we can see the area for a circle with radius 20 is 1256.636. Let's run it again and use a different number. I keep saying 700, so this is going to be a big number, but let's go ahead and see what happens when we run it with 700. Woo, that's a big number. But you can see it will tell me, it will calculate the radius for pretty much anything I enter. And let's do it one more time. Let's go with something a little bit smaller. How about 5? All right. So I can do this with multiple different, pretty much any number. And just as a note, I can also do it, whoops, with decimal numbers. By the way, you'll notice when this prints out, it says 5.0, 700.0, etc. We're going to talk about why that is when we get to the video on types and conversion. So don't worry about it for now. And that is how we get user input.